Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. I'm Jim McInnes. I'm from Baiyasi County, and I was the CEO at Crystal Mountain for about 35 years. We use a lot of energy there. We're using up to 5 megawatts now when we make snow. So I use that as my background. Happy Earth Day also. Michigan, as you know, is aggressively pursuing a goal of cleaning up our energy grid by powering it with 60% renewables by 2030 under its Healthy Climate Plan. Most people are unaware, however, that in the U.S. right now, about 22% of the power grid is powered by renewable energy. 22%. A lot of it is wind. So I've been interested in energy since college, which was a few years ago. I've been a power engineer, a licensed professional engineer for 40 years. I worked as a power engineer for the company that designed the Ludington Pump Storage Plant. I've developed power plants in Northern California. I was the chair of the Michigan Utility Consumer Participation Board for 10 years, and what we did is we intervened in electric and gas utility rate cases against DTE and Consumers Energy and some of the other large utilities on behalf of residential ratepayers to try to keep the rates down and to also promote clean energy. So that's kind of my background. I'm still in the ski business. We're part owners of Crystal Mountain, and so global warming is a big issue to me. So I'm very focused on this issue, and I've been involved in it for a long time. So let's see how this goes here.
Should be the button to the right.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So I wanted to start with our energy transition and talk a little bit about what's happening. Basically, we have global warming, right? I think everybody here gets that. And we also have a situation where large centralized power plants are being retired. They're aging out. Coal plants are being destroyed now. They're done. Nuclear plants are being shut down. Some of them their lives are being extended. But the major, large centralized power plants are aging out. So we got two things happening. Climate change, power plants are aging out. And what's happening is the existing power plants are being replaced by many more decentralized power plants called DERs, distributed energy resources. And so, and that could include solar panels on your house, could include community solar, a lot of different things. So think about it this way. If you have relatively few large generating plants, and you close those and then you put maybe 10 or 20 times, maybe 100 times more smaller plants, you're going to need a lot more connectivity to connect these plants to the grid, to form the grid. And so we're going to need more transmission and distribution lines as a key part of this energy transition. And most people don't realize how important that is. That's not to take away from local solar and all of that, but we're going to need to go and look at a much broader area and to be able to draw power from lots of different places, not just in Michigan, but even in the Midwest and throughout the U.S. So let's talk about energy, the relationship of energy, money, and the economy. Well, when you think about it, the real economic wealth is two things. It's buildings, roads, bridges, buildings like this. This is a lot, it took a lot of energy to make a building like this. The other thing that's really important is the ability to control the flows of useful energy. So for example, when we're running our snow guns or our chairlifts at Crystal Mountain, we're controlling the flows of energy coming to our business, which allows us to operate our business. And really, every business needs energy in it. Everything needs energy. So we think a lot about money, and money is what's used to deploy the energy. It's not really, it's a marker for energy. It's not, what totally runs society. The energy is what runs society. The money just helps to deploy it. And so the other thing that's important to recognize is you can create money. If you want money, you go to the bank and say, I want to borrow $100,000. They can just hit a couple keystrokes, put $100,000 in your account, just like that. It's that simple. I know, I borrowed a lot of money over the last 35 years. But you can't do that with energy. Energy, there's just a finite amount of energy, but it takes energy to make more energy. So it's kind of an important concept that really money has very little intrinsic value. What really has the value is being able to control the flows of energy. There's another concept called energy return on energy invested. Think of it in the same context as you would money. You invest money and then you want to get a return on it. Well, the same thing is true with energy. You want to invest energy to get more energy. It takes energy to get energy. But again, the difference is you can't just, with a keystroke, create more of it. You have to use real energy to create more energy. To create more useful energy. So this concept is called EROI, energy return on energy invested. And what's really important is the energy that you use at the point of use. It's not like, hey, we got energy out of the ground. Well, here's a process chain for thermal fuels, like oil, let's say, or gas. So what you do is you extract it to start with. That takes energy to extract, to get that energy. Then you prepare it. Then you transmit it. Then you refine it. Then you purify it. And then you distribute it. And then eventually, you use it. And each one of those steps, there's waste. There are losses in energy. So you start with 100 units of energy, and all through these steps, you're losing energy in the process. So that's an important concern. So what's really important is what's it going to look like at the point of use. And a good example to look at is automobile. Take a regular gas-powered vehicle. For every 100 units of fuel that you put in the tank, you get about somewhere between 16 and 25 units of traction on the wheels. So it's efficient. It's about 20 to 25% efficient. From what you put in the tank, most of it goes up in the form of heat and other losses in a regular internal combustion engine car. So that's waste. So let's look at an electric vehicle. You put 100 units of fuel into a battery. You get about 90% of it in the form of traction. It's very efficient. So it's 90% efficient, roughly 85, 90% efficient. So for example, with most of the electric cars today, you can get about 4.5 miles for 1 kilowatt hour of energy. Think about that. Now, you can charge at night, 1 kilowatt hour costs 10 cents. So you can go 4.5 miles for 10 cents, or 45 miles for $1. So that's how efficient and inexpensive it is to operate an electric car. And that's a fairly standard number. There's another really important concept, and it's shown with a diagram called a Sankey diagram. This is from Lawrence Livermore Laboratories out in California. And basically what it shows, it's kind of a sources and uses of energy. So on the left side we have sources. I know it's a little hard to read, but solar, nuclear, hydro, wind, geothermal, natural gas, coal, biomass, and petroleum. Those are the sources. And this is, it's a little bit dated, but the concept is the same. In the US, we used 101 quadrillion BTUs of energy. That's a lot of energy, in 2018. We used about 11 or 12% for residential, about 10% for commercial, 26% for industrial, and about 28% for transportation. That's how that energy, that's how it's broken out. And out of all that, out of 100, let's say 100 quads, about 1/3 of it actually does the work. 1/3 of the total energy that you put in does work, useful work. 2/3 is waste. That's the reality. That's what happens. So in our society, we put in a lot of money into getting energy, and we waste about 2/3 of it. Generally, I mean, there's a number. I mean, you can look at more current data, but the concept is the same. Most of it goes up in smoke or waste heat. So now let me talk about the grid for a minute. In the US, we have 3 power grids. We have the Eastern grid, the Western grid, and the Texas grid. And the Eastern grid has about 700 gigawatts of nameplate capacity of power plants, which is the equivalent of about 700 nuclear power plants. So 1 gigawatt is roughly a nuclear power plant capacity. So you have 700 here. The Western grid is 350 gigawatts. The Texas grid is about 70 gigawatts. So the challenge is that they don't talk. These grids don't talk. So the connection, and I'll show you the next slide here, the connection between the grids is called a seam. There's been a lot of work studying this seam. There are 7 connections that connect these grids. And so you've got 350 gigawatts here, 700 gigawatts here. You can only pass about 1.3 gigawatts of power between the eastern and western grid. And Texas is essentially not connected either. So we're really limited in how much power we have around the country in terms of actually moving it around, which is very helpful when you're trying to make sure everybody can turn the lights on. So let's look at some of the energy sources. Here's solar. You can see the orange areas are the areas where we have a lot of solar power and prices are low. There's a lot of sun, make a lot of solar power. We can do it here in Michigan, as Alan was talking about. But some of the best solar is, down in these areas. So southwest, southeast primarily. Then let's look at wind. This red area here is where we have the most wind. This is called the levelized cost of electricity. For wind, it can be, in this red area, it can be like 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's very inexpensive. So we say the Midwest is the Saudi Arabia of wind. There's a tremendous amount of wind out there. And that's one of the reasons why the U.S. now has about 22% renewable energy on the entire U.S. grid, is primarily because of wind. And then let's look at hydropower. All these little blue dots, those are hydropower plants around North America, including Canada. So you can see the renewable energy, it's all dispersed. You have solar in one area, wind in another area, hydro spread out all over. So that's what we're dealing with. And when you have all these dispersed energy sources, and you have less concentrated large plants, then you need more transmission to connect it all together. In the Midwest, we have what's called the grid operator. We have what's called the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. This is the grid operator for 15 states, including Michigan. And you can see this is what's called a generator interconnection queue. So a lot of people want to connect to the grid. They've got larger power projects for the most part. They want to connect to the grid. You've got solar and wind. You've got several hundred projects that want to connect to the grid. In battery storage, about 95% of them are renewable energy. So the fossil fuel plants are going away, renewable energy is replacing it. And the people who want to build plants are proposing to build renewable energy plants. Most of them, 95% of them. That's a lot. So that's what's happening. One of the problems is, though, there's not enough transmission. So this generator interconnection queue is it's packed. People are waiting. for years sometimes to be able to connect these new power plants, these clean energy plants that we need to reduce global warming. It's a problem. Here is something to think about. I think many of you, like me, were around when the interstate highway system was formed back in the 50s. I remember coming through. I lived in Southern California. I remember these big freeways coming through. It was amazing. And these were built because President Eisenhower wanted to help the flow of people and goods, people and freight around the country, and help make the country more effective, help keep the costs down to move people and freight. That's why they built all these roads, right? It worked, right? I mean, you can buy nuts from California, you can buy stuff from all over because we have these roads. So the same thing applies for the electricity grid. We need a nationwide electricity grid because there have been studies done by the National Renewable Energy Labs, which is a part of the Department of Energy, that we can actually reduce carbon emissions by 80% if we can get with a nationwide system of electricity that's all interconnected using transmission and distribution lines. So that's kind of a big deal. So one of the questions people always ask is, well, what if we put in all these transmission lines, how much waste are we going to have? That's a good question. How much waste are we going to have if we're moving power all across the country? So I thought I'd ask you what you thought. I have 4 different areas. So let's start with A. I know this will be probably a guess for most of you, but it'd be interesting just to see what you're thinking. So how many people think the losses in the transmission, which is over 100,000 volts, and the distribution, which is usually around 12,000 or it could be 36,000 volts, is 5% or less? That's A.
Oh, really?
How many
No,
people?
He's asking us.
I'm asking for a guess. Either tell me your guess about what's the percentage of loss on the whole system, the average percentage of loss on the whole system as determined by the U.S. Energy Information Agency.
How many say A?
How many say A? 1.
How many say B?
How many say B? 1. How many say C? Okay, we're getting a few more here. 1, 2, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many say D? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tied. C and D are tied. When I do this, I've done this a few times, this presentation, I typically get these numbers here.
Yeah.
The answer, this gentleman right here has the answer. It's less than 5%.
Oh my God.
Less than 5%. And to give you an idea, in China, they're really doing a lot of work on transmission in China. In 2019, there was a transmission line that was built and activated in China. It's 2,000 miles long. It has a capacity to move 12 nuclear power plants of electricity. 2,000 miles with a loss less than 5%. It's a 1,000,000-volt line. But we have the technology. As Alan said, we have the technology. We have solar, we have hydro, we have wind. We know how to build transmission lines. We know how to build distribution lines. One thing we don't have, time. We're running out of time to do this, right? See, all our transmission and distribution lines have protective relays. Something, it gets out of whack, it'll just shut it down. Breakers will shut it down. Okay, another concept. So the answer, this is the answer here. So we can send bulk power long distances with very low loss, very low waste. That's important, right? Because we want to reduce waste. Okay, another concept that's really important is systems thinking. Probably the best example I have of this is at Crystal Mountain. I went to my outside accountant and I said, I want to build a $5 million spa. And he asked me with a little smile on his face, how many massages does it take to pay for a $5 million spa? I thought, well, that's a good question. But I didn't look at it that way. You know, because we build a spa, we get more conference business. We get more weddings. We get more ski groups. We get more golf groups. We get more people that want to buy real estate. You know, some people won't buy real estate if you don't have a spa as part of your product mix. And we sell massages. So that's systems thinking. And the power grid is a great example of a system. You have transmission, you have generators, you know, you need EVs. That's a great example of a system. You have an electric vehicle, you have a charger. It won't work. You got to have both of those. So whatever we do as we're thinking about them, we have to think big, because the world is full, everything is a system pretty much. And they're interdependent. All these systems are interdependent. But the key is the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. If I just went in and said, well, let me see how many massages I'm going to do, and I didn't take into account the other revenue streams, I would have made a bad decision. But I could tell you, we've had that spa since 2009. It's worked out beautifully in helping to bring more business to the resort. An example, if you change a wire, it's all interconnected. If you change a wire, a transmission wire in Wisconsin, that changes the flows in the Michigan grid. That's how interconnected we are. So systems thinking is really key in this whole process. This is a recent $10 billion project that was approved by the Michigan Public Service Commission last year. And what it does is it brings, this is Iowa here, Illinois, you know, there's some wind turbines here in Indiana, right through, and guess what? It comes right up to the center of Michigan. So what this does is it brings clean energy to Michigan, which we've needed. Because we can't just build clean energy here. We don't have enough spots. And some people don't like to look at wind turbines, right? We know that and understand that. But that's a reality. So we need both local energy and imported energy. So that's why this line was built. It'll take a few years to do this, but this is a big deal to provide renewable energy to Michigan from other states.
And this is something that's in process?
That's in process. It's been approved, and they'll be building. I'm not sure exactly where they're on the schedule. It was approved last year. So here's a concept. We talked about a national grid. This is called a high voltage DC macro grid. And what this is a proposal that it's just conceptual at this point. This has been studied for decades by the power engineers. I mean, they've been doing it a long time, so this is not new. But anyway, these are major transmission interconnections to help move bulk power, so it'll be an overlay. Bulk power all around the country and actually into Canada. You'll notice that I go to British Columbia a lot. 90% hydropower up there. Manitoba has a lot of hydropower. Quebec, 95% hydropower. So that we can exchange power with, with other places. We can take hydropower from them, we can send them wind power, and we can mix it all up, which will provide a more reliable and robust system for North America. So there's a study called NERIS, the North American Renewable Integration Study, that has been done by the Department of Energy that demonstrates the benefits of doing something like this. For a long time, though, that study, it's been around a while, because I know the people that worked on it. It's been in the file cabinet in the very back. Hard to believe, but sometimes these things don't get out. But now they're getting out, which is good. So when you have high voltage DC, you start with AC, then you have converter stations at each end. So it converts to DC, the line is DC, and then it converts back to AC. So it turns out Michigan has a pretty high-tech high voltage DC converter station. It's in St. Ignace. And you can only tour it when it's shut down, because if you stand in this room, the electromagnetic fields will zap you if it's running. And you can see that this room is all like steel walls, so you can't get that out. But these are called IGBTs. They're like a big diode. They help convert alternating current to direct current. And then when you do that, it creates harmonics on the grid, and these filters filter out those harmonics. But this is about 200 megawatts, which is not that big, but was built in 2014. So we have that, and basically what this is used for is to stabilize. There's a really weak little transmission line across the bottom of the UP, and this helps to stabilize the power flows on it. That was the main purpose. Rather than sending bulk power, it's a stability device. When I was in engineering school 45 years ago, I toured a converter station. It's called the Sylmar Converter Station, which was the southern end of the Pacific Intertie from Celilo, Oregon to Sylmar, California. And they had mercury arc valves that every time they moved it, you could see this glow. It was like a spaceship inside. I toured that, 1976. So these things have been around. This is not like, oh, hey, this is a new technology we got to commercialize in 10 years. No. We've been doing this for decades. Okay, so finish it up here. What do we do about it? And, I know there are lots of ways to look at our energy transition and lots of possibilities. More local, more distributed. I mean, there's a lot of ways that it can be done. The reality is we have the tools today to do it. A lot of different ways. We got the capability. Technology's there. So to me, the way it's going to probably turn out to be done is using locally generated power sources and imported power. So it's going to be the magic of the and. We're going to be doing it locally, and we're going to support it with grid connections outside. We need to plan beyond one community, utility, or state using systems thinking. So you got to think big, because one of the problems with renewables is they're more intermittent. All power plants are intermittent. Nuclear plants are intermittent. They have a 90% capacity factor, which means they're off something like 10% of the time or more. They're actually offline, every nuclear plant. So coal plants are 70% capacity factor. Gas turbines it varies, it could go from 70 to 90%. But all power plants are intermittent. But wind plants only operate about 30 or 40%. Solar is probably 20, 25% maybe. So they're more intermittent. So we need more of them, and we need some storage, like the Ludington Pump Storage Plant, like the batteries that Alan was talking about. So we need more plants, and they all need to be connected. So we need to accelerate the build-out of transmission and distribution. We need to use an all-of-the-above approach. This is not going to happen overnight. We are going to use natural gas to help keep the grid stable, keep the lights on for a while yet. And we have to realize that, even though we may not want natural gas, a fossil fuel, we may not want coal, fossil fuel, the reality is we're going to use it. We just hope to reduce the percentage of these fossil fuels in the generation mix, which is already happening. Transmission development can be a no regrets strategy, because it's ambivalent what kind of power you put on it. And typically these projects they're built with a benefit to cost ratio usually of 2 to 1, at least 2 to 1. So they're not going to build a transmission line if they don't think it's going to more than pay for itself, because that would be just throwing money. That would be a bad use of the money. So in the end, and I know this fella, I'm in a group that he's involved in. It's called Energy Systems Integration Group. No transmission, no transition. That's a reality. We have to have them. And I know it's difficult to get them permitted. There's fairness, people need to be compensated. We need to figure it out, because There's no transmission, no transition without transmission. So that's it. That's my presentation.